An ordinary waitress working in a small roadside restaurant accidentally discovers a photo of her mother in the wallet of a powerful billionaire, someone she has never met. But the way he looks at her has a deep meaning. Why would a man who lives in luxury keep a photo of a poor woman who has been dead for many years? That night, she couldn't sleep. The image haunted her like a stab in the heart, a secret she knew. If she didn't find out, she would never be able to rest. And so, her journey began, a journey not only to find the truth, but also to find herself. The deeper she digs, the more she discovers fragments of memories she thought were lost old letters, unfulfilled promises, and a love buried by a man's wrong choices. When she confronts that man, she's forced to ask herself, does forgiveness mean forgetting, or daring to look back without pain? It's not just her story, it's perhaps the story of all of us who have been lost, angry, and still yearning to be loved. Because sometimes the things that hurt us the most are the things that help us grow the most. Please like and share before reading the story below, because who knows, you might see yourself in it. The wind chimes outside jingled softly as a chilly breeze blew by. Inside the Bluebird Diner, blue neon lights flickered across the empty tables. The clock on the wall read nearly 10 o'clock at night. At this hour, in the small town of Willow Creek, Tennessee, few people were awake. Lena Carter stood behind the counter, a towel in hand, watching the steam rise from her half-finished cup of coffee. The smell of strong coffee, with a hint of vanilla, filled the air, mixed with the damp smell of rain from outside. She was used to the silence so quiet she could hear the clock ticking, or the clang of metal from the kitchen behind her. The night shift at the Bluebird was quiet, with only a few long-haul drivers stopping to rest and a few lonely people looking for a hot cup of coffee before heading home. Lena liked the quiet. It reminded her of her mother, Grace Carter, who once told her, when life gets too loud, listen to the smallest sound. There you will find yourself. She sighed, picked up the glass, and put it in the dishwasher, intending to clean up early to close the door when the doorbell rang. A man walked in. The sunlight reflected off his gray suit and rain-stained leather shoes. He was tall and straight, his every movement exuding confidence and power. Lena knew without asking that this was not a man from the town. This man had a different energy, like he belonged in places with glass windows, red carpets, and million-dollar parties. He sat down on the chair by the window, took off his glasses, and scanned the restaurant. His gaze was sharp and cold, but also a little tired. Lena took the menu and walked over. "What would you like?" she asked, her voice soft and polite. The man didn't look up. Black coffee, no sugar. His voice was low, hoarse, and firm. Someone familiar giving orders, Lena thought. She turned to the counter, poured coffee, put the white cup on the tray, and walked to the table. He looked out the window, seemingly unaware of her presence. When Lena put down her coffee, he only nodded his thanks. She stepped back, about to leave when she heard a small rustling sound. He took out his wallet, an expensive leather one, and when he opened it to look for money, an old photograph fell to the floor. A faded photo. Lena bent down to pick it up reflexively, and the moment the light hit the face in the photo, her heart stopped. It was her mother. It was Grace Carter. The woman in the photo was smiling, a gentle smile that Lena could never forget, even 10 years after her death. She was wearing a simple floral dress, her hair tied up in a bun, standing in front of a small wooden house. Every detail matched, from the faint scar on her wrist to the silver bracelet she always wore. There was no mistaking it. Lena's hands were shaking. She looked up, eyes wide. Where did you get this photo?" The man turned back, his eyes cold as steel. For a moment, Lena saw confusion flash in his eyes, but he quickly hid it. He reached out to take the photo back, his voice calm. "You're wrong. I don't know who the person in the photo is." Lena clenched her fists. "I'm not mistaken. This is my mother, Grace Carter." The atmosphere in the shop was thick. The only sound was the steady ticking of the clock. She could hear her heart pounding. The man looked at her for a second, then stood up. "It's just an old photograph," he said, his voice low. He pulled a 100 bill out of his wallet and put it on the table. "Keep the change. Wait." Lena followed, her voice a mix of fear and anger. "Why do you have this picture? Do you know my mother?" He stopped and turned. Something flickered in those blue-gray eyes of pain, or memory, and then vanished like the wind. "Forget it," he said softly, and walked out the door. The doorbell rang again. The door closed. The black Bentley outside turned into the rain and disappeared. Lena stood still. The neon blue light reflected off the wet floor, blurring her face. The $100 bill was still there, but she didn't bother to pick it up. Next to it was a drop of water, or maybe it was a tear that had fallen from her eye. She looked out. The rain fell like endless silver threads, and somewhere in the sound of the rain, a question echoed in her mind. Who was that man? And why did he carry a picture of his mother with him all these years? The answer was not yet there. But in Lena's heart, a door had opened. A door leading to secrets she perhaps was never ready to face. Lena returned to her small apartment just as the clock was approaching midnight. The street lights outside shone through the thin curtains, casting long shadows on the rough walls. The rain continued to fall, its steady patter on the tin roof like a rhythm to the chaotic thoughts in her head. She put her wet raincoat on a chair, poured herself a glass of water, and sat down by the window. The smell of rain, cigarette smoke from the apartment upstairs, and the lingering coffee on her hands mingled together. Normally, Lena wouldn't have paid any attention to such little things, but tonight, everything seemed painfully clear. The picture of her mother still appeared in her mind, every line as if it had been taken yesterday. That gentle smile, those eyes filled with warmth and kindness. It had been 10 years since Grace Carter had left, but Lena had never forgotten. Her mother had died of heart disease, a disease that could have been cured if they had had the money. She leaned her head back against the wall and closed her eyes. Part of her wanted to believe it was all a coincidence, that the man, Michael Harrington, simply happened to have the exact same photo as her mother. But her mind couldn't shake the chill that ran down her spine as his eyes swept over her. Something familiar, profound, almost recognizable. She remembered every detail, his deep voice, his hands holding the photo, his gaze straying as she asked. It was all too real, too strange to be a coincidence. Lena opened her laptop, the screen reflecting her tired face. She typed Michael Harrington into the search box. A series of results appeared, pictures of him in perfectly tailored suits, appearing at galas, in articles about real estate and charity. CEO of Harrington Development Group, one of the largest housing developers in the South. She clicked on the most prominent article. It was a picture of him standing in front of a model of a new urban area, smiling confidently, with the words, "Building the Future of America," written behind him. She read each line, her heart beating faster. On the company's list of projects, she saw a name that made her breath catch: Maple Grove Redevelopment Project. Maple Grove. The name brought back a flood of childhood memories. She had lived there, a small, suburban neighborhood where her mother worked as a volunteer nurse. It had been a community of poor, working-class families. Then, one day, the government announced the redevelopment of the old neighborhood. Houses were demolished. Residents had to move. She and her mother were among them. Grace cried a lot when she had to leave the old cabin, but she never told Lena the real reason. Lena only knew that her mother said, "We have no right to be there anymore." And now, she knew which company had done the project. His company. Lena closed her laptop, confused. Was there some connection between her mother and Michael Harrington? Maybe. They had known each other when Maple Grove still existed. Or had she worked for him? Or worse, was she the one he had hurt? Another question suddenly arose, making her feel breathless. If he knew her mother, why had he carried the photo with him all these years? She stood up and walked across the small room that had just enough space for a single bed and an old desk. Everything was neat and quiet, but her heart was pounding like a storm. She opened a drawer and took out the wooden box her mother had left her. Inside were a few old photos, a nursing certificate, and the last letter from the hospital when her mother died. Lena flipped through the photos, looking for clues, but there was nothing but familiar memories. No sign of the man named Michael Harrington. She sat down on the floor, clutching the wooden box. Tears welled up in her eyes without her realizing it. "Mom, did you ever know him? Who was he in your life?" The room was silent. Only the sound of rain and my heart pounding in my chest remained. She jumped up and grabbed her phone. She scrolled through pictures of Michael online. In one, he was shaking hands with the governor. In another, he was standing next to a gleaming glass building, his eyes confident, the look of a man who had the world in his hands. "He has everything," she muttered. But why keep a picture of a woman like my mother? As the night wore on, the rain became heavier. Lena sat motionless in front of the window, watching the water streak across the glass and run down in streams. Everything was spinning in her head. Images, memories, questions. Part of her wanted to forget, as he said, but another part, deeper, stronger, forced her to know the truth, not out of curiosity, but because her mother deserved to know, even though her mother was dead. Lena felt her mother was somewhere watching, waiting for her to continue what she had not had time to do. She took a deep breath. Then she opened her laptop again and typed in the search bar, "Harrington Tower, Nashville." The address appeared. She wrote it down on a piece of paper and set it on the table. "Tomorrow," she whispered. "Tomorrow, I will be there, outside." Lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the room for a moment. The light flickered and died, but inside Lena, another fire had begun to burn. It's not just a desire for answers. It's a belief that the truth, no matter how painful, is worth facing. She turned off the light and lay down, but sleep did not come. In the darkness, she heard the sound of rain outside the door, mixed with a whisper like her mother's voice years ago. "Don't be afraid, Lena. When you search for the truth, you are also searching for yourself." Her eyes were closed, but the tears kept falling. That night, the rain kept falling. The morning in Willow Creek was foggy and cold. The first rays of sunlight were just breaking through the gray clouds, reflecting off the glass doors of the Bluebird Diner, where Lena sat when she wasn't working. In front of her was a cold cup of coffee and a dimly lit laptop screen. Her eyes were tired, but her mind was clearer than ever. She had been up all night. The name Michael Harrington is more than just a name in the newspaper. He is a link to her past. A past Lena feels she has only scratched the surface of. She scrolled down, rereading each article, each line of information. There was an article praising him as a philanthropist who had donated millions to housing funds. There was a story about his life born into a wealthy family, inheriting a real estate empire from his father. Photos of him shaking hands with politicians, the lavish projects he built all gleaming, spotless, suspiciously perfect. Lena took out a pen and wrote down the group's major projects: the Ridgeview Estates, Westfield Towers, and finally Maple Grove redevelopment. She stopped at the name. Every time she read it, her heart ached. The poor neighborhood where she had grown up, where her mother had devoted most of her life. It had been bulldozed, replaced by luxury apartments that the people in the neighborhood could not afford. Maybe that's where it all started, she muttered. Maple Grove. The door of the shop opened. The jingle of the bell brought her back to reality. Nora Davis, her only friend, walked in with an old jean jacket and a tired smile. "Are you still awake?" Nora asked, pulling up a chair and sitting down opposite. Lena shook her head, her voice low. "No way. I think I found something. About Mom." Nora frowned. "What do you mean?" Lena turned the laptop screen toward you, pointing to a picture of Michael Harrington. "Him. I saw him at the bar last night. When he took out his wallet, a picture fell out. It was my mom." Nora was silent for a few seconds, staring at you without blinking. "Are you sure maybe it's just a doppelganger?" "No way," Lena said quickly. "I know every line of that face. It's my mother, Nora, her—" Nora sighed, shaking her head. "So, what are you going to do? You can't just go knock on a billionaire's door and say, 'Do you know my mother?'" "No," Lena replied, her voice small. "I can't, but I'll find a way." They were silent. The only sound was old country music from the radio in the bar. Lena looked out the window, where the morning light was fading. "My mom was a volunteer nurse at Maple Grove," Lena continued. "The Harrington Group project destroyed that place. Maybe there was something between them, before it all fell apart." Nora looked at her for a long time, then said slowly, "What are you looking for? Lena, truth or justice?" Lena bowed her head, her voice choked. "Maybe both. My mother died without ever speaking of her past. If he really was involved, I would know." Nora put a hand on her shoulder. "But be careful. Men like him are not easy to deal with." Lena nodded slightly, but her eyes remained firm. "I don't need his approval. I just need an answer." After Nora left, Lena stayed. She opened the Harrington Group website again. At the bottom of the article was the headquarters address, Harrington Tower, downtown Nashville, just over an hour's drive from where she lived. She printed out the map and circled the building in red pen. Next to it, she wrote a few small lines. "Maple Grove, Grace Carter, 1998. At noon, Lena left the cafe and walked back to her apartment. The first winter wind blew, making her shiver. She walked quickly, remembering her time in Maple Grove, children running between small houses, her mother waving to neighbors on the porch, sunlight streaming through the faded wooden windows. Everything was simple and warm until the bulldozers appeared, the roar of the engines drowning out the screams. That day, Grace hugged her and whispered, "It's okay, baby. We'll find another place." But Lena still clearly remembered her mother's eyes as she looked at the house for the last time. The eyes of someone who had lost the thing she loved most. Now that she knew that the man behind the project was the man who carried her mother's picture in his wallet, her heart was boiling. Why did he keep the picture? Was it regret, pity, or just a trick of fate? She opened the closet, took out her thick coat, put a small notebook, a pen, and her phone in her pocket. She stood in front of the mirror, looking at herself for a long time. Her eyes were dark, her cheeks were thin, but there was something new in her gaze, determination. "I will find out. Mom," she said softly, as if to herself. That afternoon, Lena caught the earliest bus to Nashville. The city was busier than she'd expected. Skyscrapers, bright billboards, bustling crowds. She pulled on her coat and walked down the main avenue, her heart racing as she saw Harrington Tower looming in the distance, a mass of glass reflecting the silvery sky. On the glass, silver letters stand out Harrington Development Group. She stood at the bottom of the building, looking up at the upper floors. The cold wind blew through her hair, making her feel so small that it made her suffocate. But she did not retreat. Lena pulled a piece of paper from her pocket with her mother's name and the words Maple Grove on it. She looked at it for a long time, then clenched her fists. Every question, every pain, every sleepless night brought her here, the place that could hold the truth she longed to find. The sky darkened. The lights on the building turned on, reflecting on her face. Lena took a deep breath and walked towards the main door. Inside, there might be answers, or another storm awaiting her. But to Lena, it no longer mattered. Because once she started, she knew she wouldn't stop until she knew the whole truth. It was a bright morning in downtown Nashville. The sky was a bright blue, reflecting off the gleaming glass walls of the skyscrapers. Lena stood in front of the main entrance of Harrington Tower, her hands clutching the strap of her bag. The building loomed over the city like a symbol of power, the sunlight casting blinding streaks of light on its glass. A steady stream of well-dressed people came and went, all looking busy, confident, and hurried. Lena, in her old brown coat and worn-out shoes, looked like she was in another world. But she didn't turn away. She knew she wasn't here to find a suitable place, but to find the truth. She stepped into the main lobby. The scent of expensive perfume filled the air, and high heels echoed on the marble floors. A large statue stood in the center of the lobby, a bronze portrait of Jonathan Harrington, Michael's father, the founder of the corporation. At the base of the statue were the words vision, power, legacy. Lena looked at the words for a long time, then smiled slightly. "Vision, power, legacy," she whispered. "But what about kindness?" She walked up to the reception desk. The girl behind the desk was blonde, wearing a black suit, and had a professional smile. "Hello, how can I help you?" "I want to see Mr. Michael Harrington," Lena said, trying to keep her voice calm. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but this is private. Important." The receptionist smiled politely, tapping a few words on her keyboard. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Harrington doesn't see people without appointments. If you'd like to leave a message, please tell him I'm Grace Carter's daughter." Lena interrupted. "He'll want to meet me." The receptionist's smile faltered for a moment. She looked at Lena more closely, a hint of confusion in her eyes. "Excuse me, did you say Grace Carter?" "Yes," Lena said firmly. "He knew my mother." The receptionist hesitated, then picked up the intercom and whispered a few words. After putting the phone down, she said, "Please wait a moment. I will check." Lena stood still, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it. If he refused, she told herself, she wouldn't leave. She'd come here to face it, no matter what. A man in a gray suit emerged from the elevator. He was about 40, his face serious, his eyes searching. "You are Lena Carter." "Right. I'm Ethan Cole, Mr. Harrington's assistant. He can give you 5 minutes." Lena nodded, her heart sinking. 5 minutes, to her. It could be a lifetime. She followed Ethan into the elevator. It was a closed space. Only the sound of the machine running softly could be heard. The higher they went, the heavier her heart became. "May I ask what this is about?" Ethan turned, his voice polite but cold. "It has to do with my mother," Lena replied, "and with your boss." Ethan didn't ask any more questions. The elevator doors opened on the 42nd floor. The room was large, with high ceilings, white light reflecting off the polished wood floors. A large glass wall offered a view of Nashville, and there, standing with his back to the window, was Michael Harrington. He turned around when he heard footsteps. Still in the dark suit, deep eyes, calm face. No longer the strange look from the night at the restaurant, but the demeanor of a man used to making decisions. "Hello?" His voice was low, soft but powerful. "You wanted to see me?" Lena took a deep breath. "Yes. I am Lena Carter, daughter of Grace Carter. Does that name mean anything to you?" The air in the room froze. Ethan looked at his boss, and Michael was silent for a few seconds. Then he gestured to Ethan. "Okay, let us talk in private." When the door closed, only 2 people remained. Lena stood up straight, her eyes steady. "Last night, at the Bluebird, you dropped a picture of my mother. I want to know how you got it." Michael was silent for a long time. He walked over to his desk, pulled out his wallet, opened it, and took out the exact photo. He put it down on the desk. "Are you sure this is your mother?" "I'm sure," Lena said, her voice trembling but firm. "I've seen that picture all my childhood." He looked at the photo for a moment, then said softly, "Grace. She never said she had children." Lena was startled. Her heart dropped. You really know my mother?" Michael looked up. His eyes blurred for a moment, as if seeing the old image of the woman from years ago. "Yes, I know her. Very well." His voice dropped, carrying an undisguised regret. "Grace was the best person I ever met, and maybe the only person I ever loved." That statement made Lena stand still. She didn't know what to say. She just felt her heart pounding, her head spinning. "What are you talking about?" Michael turned away, looking out the window. "Years ago, when I was vice president of my father's company, I went to Maple Grove. It was originally a plan to build low-cost housing for workers. Grace was a volunteer nurse there. She helped the community, saving lives in the old gas station fire. I met her when I was injured myself. And then—" His voice broke, as if unable to continue. Lena felt a lump in her throat. "And then you left?" she asked, her voice cold. Michael turned back, looking at her with a mixture of guilt and exhaustion. "When my father found out, He threatened to cut off all my assets and reputation if I didn't end things with Grace. I chose the company. I was wrong. Very wrong. Lena stood there, her heart aching. This powerful man suddenly looked small, almost pitiful, but she did not let herself be weak. "My mother died of heart disease," she said softly. "No money, no insurance. If you really loved her, why didn't you come back?" Michael clenched his fists, his voice low. "I searched, but she was gone. No one knew where she went. I kept this picture for 20 years. The air thickened. Lena was silent, her mind a jumble of anger and sympathy. She looked at the photo, then at the man before her. Part of her wanted to scream, to blame him for letting her mother suffer. But another, deeper part of her felt her heart pounding. After a few seconds of silence, she said, "You owe my mother an apology." Michael nodded slightly. "I know, and if I may, I would like to start by apologizing to you." Lena looked at him for a long time. Then she said softly, "I don't need an apology. I need the truth." Their eyes met, deep and heavy. In that moment, the past and the present seemed to merge into one. One searching for the past, the other running away from it. Lena stood still, her eyes fixed on the photograph on the table. The midday sun streamed through the windows, reflecting off the glass and onto Michael Harrington's face. He was still calm, but there was something very human in his eyes, not the look of a billionaire, but of a man who had lost the most important thing in his life. "You're right," he said slowly. "You need the truth, and I owe you that." Lena didn't answer. She pulled up a chair and sat down, her hands clasped together. She still wasn't sure whether to believe him or not, but she knew she had to hear it all. Michael walked to the window and looked up at the bustling city of Nashville below. His voice was low and heavy. "More than 20 years ago, my father put me in charge of the Maple Grove redevelopment project. At the time, the neighborhood was poor and run down, but I saw something precious in it. She, your mother, was the only one who believed that the neighborhood could be changed without tearing it down." Lena listened, her heart beating fast. Grace was a volunteer nurse, but she was really the soul of Maple Grove. People loved her, not just for her heart, but for the way she made people believe that Maple Grove was worth living in. I was convinced by her, and then I was changed by her. His voice trailed off, almost in a confession. "We met every afternoon, talking about her dream to build a free medical center for children. I helped her find sponsors. But when my father found out, everything fell apart." Lena squeezed her hand slightly. Because he didn't approve of the relationship, Michael nodded, his eyes sad. He said if I continued to see Grace, he would cut off my finances and remove me from the company. I was scared. I thought if I just accepted it now, I could come back later. But when the project started, things got out of control. They demolished the whole area, and the residents were evicted. I looked for Grace, but she was gone, without a trace. The air in the room was heavy. Lena bowed her head, her voice trembling slightly. "And you lived like that." For 20 years, Michael didn't answer right away. He turned and looked at her, his eyes so sincere it surprised Lena. "Not a day goes by that I don't think about her. I keep this picture because it's all I have left." Lena looked down at the photo, conflicted. Part of her was angry this man, with all his power and money, had caused her mother to lose her home, her faith, and ultimately her chance at life. But the other part of her couldn't deny that there was something real in his voice, Real pain. You know, Lena said softly, when my mother died, she kept a little box in a drawer. There was a note in it that said, Maple Grove, an unfulfilled dream. I thought she meant the community hospital, but now I understand. She meant something else. Michael closed his eyes. She always looked on the bright side, and I just took the easy way out. Easy for you, Lena replied, but difficult for everyone else. Her words stopped him. They weren't harsh, but they cut him. Michael walked to the table, placing his hands on the glass. You're right, I was wrong. Lena was silent. There was a long pause, only the ticking of the clock. She looked at him, then asked softly, So why did you call me here? To ask for forgiveness? Michael shook his head. No, I called you here because I need to tell you something more important. Maybe it will change the way you see things. He opened a drawer and took out an old envelope, yellowed at the edges. I've kept this for 20 years. It's the only thing Grace left me. He handed the envelope to Lena. She saw the neat handwriting on the front, to Michael. Her hands shook slightly as she opened it. Inside was a letter written in blue ink, in soft handwriting. She began to read. Michael, by the time you read this letter, things between us will probably have changed. I don't blame you. I understand. There are things people can't fight, even if their hearts want them to. But I can't stay. Maple Grove is being taken away, and I can't watch it disappear at the hands of the one I love. I have to go, not just for myself, but for the child growing inside me. Grace. Lena froze, her eyes widened, her breath caught. Each word seemed to drown her in a wave of emotion. She read it again, then looked up, looked at Michael, her voice breaking. Did you know she was pregnant? Michael stood still, his eyes wide with shock. What did you say? The child is growing inside me. Lena read each word again, her hands shaking. Don't you know? Michael shook his head, his voice hoarse. No, I had no idea. She never told me. I looked for her, but no one knew where she went. I even thought she was. He couldn't continue. Lena looked at him, hot tears rolling down her cheeks. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. The man before her, the one who had caused her mother so much pain, was her own father. The air in the room seemed to freeze. The two of them stood there, silent, except for the sound of their hearts pounding in their chests. Finally, Lena took a small step back, as if needing some space to breathe. So, all these years, you didn't know you had a child? Michael looked at her, his voice breaking, brutally honest. If I had known, I wouldn't have left you so destitute. I looked for you, but Grace was gone. I thought she had chosen to forget me. Lena wiped away her tears, trying to keep her voice calm. My mother didn't forget you. She just chose to protect me from you. The statement made Michael bow his head. He did not argue. Perhaps, deep down, he knew it was true. A gentle breeze blew through the crack in the door, making the white curtains flutter. Lena stood looking at him, 1,000 emotions surging inside her. Anger, pity, regret, and something that felt like emptiness. After a long silence, Michael said softly, I dare not ask for your forgiveness, but if you will allow me, I would like to make amends, even if it is just the smallest part. Lena looked at him. Her voice was tight but firm. No one can make up for lost years, but maybe the truth is enough. Michael nodded slightly, his eyes red. Grace once said, "The truth may hurt, but it is the only thing that can keep people alive." Lena turned away and looked out the window. Nashville was still shining brightly. Under the sunlight, she suddenly heard her mother's voice clearly in her heart. "You will understand, someday, and today." Finally, she understood. The room was so quiet that one could hear every breath. Lena stood there, holding the letter, blurred with tears. Across the table, Michael looked at her with heavy eyes, mixed with fragile hope. Two people, two generations, tied together in a painful past that no one really understood. Lena gently placed the letter on the table, then took a step back. She needed space to breathe. The luxurious, bright room suddenly felt stuffy. "I don't know what to say," she said, her voice trembling. "All these years, I thought my father was just someone who abandoned me and my mother. It turns out he was you." Michael took a step forward, but stopped when he saw her defensive look. "I understand. You need time." Lena shook her head. "No, you don't understand. You live in the tallest buildings, eat the most luxurious dinners. And my mother," she paused, fighting back tears. "She died in our old apartment because she couldn't afford medicine. If you knew you had a child, if you really loved my mother, why did you let it get to that point?" Michael was silent. Her words were like a knife. He took a deep breath, his voice low. "I deserve it. But believe me, Lena, I didn't know. I looked for her. I went to Maple Grove. I went to the hospitals. I sent people everywhere. I didn't give up. I just didn't have the courage to fight when I needed to." "Not brave enough," Lena repeated, her voice breaking. "Do you know how brave my mother was to raise me? She worked as a nurse, a waitress, anything to pay the hospital bills. She never complained. She never mentioned your name once, maybe because she knew it would only make the pain worse." Michael didn't look at her. He turned away, staring out the window at Nashville, still glowing with light. "I thought I was a winner," he said softly, "but now I realize I was a coward. I lost Grace, and I lost you before I even knew I had you." Lena clenched her hands, tears welling up in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. "You know what the worst part is?" she choked. "I don't know whether to hate you or love you." Michael turned back, his eyes softening. "You don't owe me any feelings, neither hate nor love. Just be true to yourself." She looked at him, seeing something in his eyes that was very similar to her mother's, a gentle sadness, a look of guilt, but not of pleading. Perhaps that was what made her heart waver. After a moment of silence, she asked, "If my mother had told you that she was pregnant, what would you have done?" Michael replied without thinking, "I will give up everything. The company, the money, the Harrington name. I will choose her." "But you didn't," Lena said softly. "Because I didn't know," he said, his voice choking, "and that's what's been bothering me for 20 years. There's not a day that goes by that I don't think, if Grace were still alive, I'd apologize to her. And now, you're the only one I can say that to." Lena looked at him. She saw real pain, beyond the facade of a powerful man. She saw in his eyes the image of a man who had lost more than love. He had lost his family. He had lost the best part of himself. She turned away and looked outside. The streets below were bustling with people and cars. Life went on, even though someone was in pain. "I need time," she said softly. "I don't know if I can forgive." My mother used to say that forgiveness isn't about forgetting, it's about learning to move on, but I'm not ready." Michael nodded, not arguing. "I understand. All I want is," he paused, his voice choking, "that you give me the chance to be close to you, even from afar. I don't want to lose another loved one." Lena was silent. She could hear the clock ticking, her heart pounding in her chest. "I don't promise anything," she said slowly, "but I won't leave without thinking." Michael smiled slightly, a smile that was both grateful and sad. "That's enough." She stood up, took the letter back from the table, and folded it carefully. "I will keep this, not for you, but for my mother." "You should keep it," he said hoarsely. "She told me that one day the truth would come out. Maybe this is the day." Lena nodded slightly, then turned and walked out the door. Before leaving, she stopped and looked at him one last time. "If my mother were still alive, maybe she would forgive you, but I don't know yet. I just know she loved you very much." The sentence made Michael stand still. He did not reply, just watched her figure disappear through the window. As Lena stepped out of the building, the wind picked up, whipping her hair around. She stopped in the middle of the lobby, where a bronze statue of Jonathan Harrington still stood. Beneath it were the words "Legacy." She whispered, "His legacy was power. My mother's was love. Which one should I choose for the rest of me outside?" The sun was softening. Lena walked, her heart heavy but no longer chaotic. She knew she wasn't ready to forgive, but at least she knew who she was, and that was the beginning of healing. Left in the office, Michael sat alone, his eyes fixed on the distance. He held the old ring in his desk drawer, the only thing left of Grace. "Grace," he whispered, "you left me the greatest gift of my life." A tear silently fell down onto the old letter. Perhaps, at that moment, that powerful man was no longer the CEO of a corporation, but just a father who had just found his child too late, but still in time to love. The sky in Nashville turned gray that day. A light autumn breeze blew through the trees on the avenue, carrying the smell of earth and the dampness of fallen leaves. Lena walked slowly down the sidewalk, clutching her purse, which still held her mother's old letter. It had all happened so quickly in a matter of hours. Her whole world had been turned upside down. She stopped at a small cafe on a quiet street corner with a faded wooden sign that read "Hollow Bean Cafe" inside. The smell of roasted coffee and soft jazz music made her feel a little better. She chose a seat near the window, ordered a cappuccino, and sat quietly watching the rain begin to fall sporadically outside. The raindrops hit the glass, breaking into long streaks. Lena watched them, her mind drifting back to her childhood, when her mother was still alive, when life was hard but full of laughter. She remembered the mornings they would go to the market on Maple Street corner. Her mother, Grace, always wearing an old wool cap, pulling a small cart. She never complained, even though she had to work 2 jobs in the last months. Lena was only 10 years old then and knew nothing about the world outside that cramped but warm apartment. One time, she asked, "Mom, why don't we have a picture of Dad like the other kids?" Grace paused for a moment, then smiled gently. "Because your dad is someone I can't keep, honey, but that doesn't mean he's not a good man." "So, do you hate him?" she asked innocently. Grace shook her head, looking at her daughter with soft, sad eyes. "No, I don't. I just regret that he didn't have the courage to choose the right thing. At the time, Lena didn't understand. But now, reading the letter again, she realized her mother had told the truth, no bitterness, no blame, just regret mixed with forgiveness. She smiled faintly, sipping her cold coffee. "Mom," she whispered, "I met him. He wasn't what I thought." Outside, the rain began to fall heavily. Passers-by rushed to take shelter under the eaves, but Lena remained still. A conflicting feeling crept into her heart, between hatred and compassion, between past and present. Her phone vibrated. It was from Ruth, her mother's best friend, who occasionally visited the cafe where Lena worked. "I heard you took the day off. Are you okay? I still have some of Grace's things if you want to see them." Lena looked at the screen for a long time, then replied, "I'll stop by tonight." She paid, left the shop, and walked out in the rain. The cold rain bit her skin, but she didn't mind. She felt like she needed to find the starting point, the place where the remaining memories of her mother were. Ruth's house was on the southern outskirts of the city, about 15 miles from downtown. A 2-story wooden house surrounded by maple trees that were red in autumn. Ruth opened the door to see Lena, a gentle smile and warm eyes. "It's been a while," she said, her voice hoarse but gentle. "Come in. I've made some tea." Lena walked in, the house smelling of cinnamon and cookies. The living room was as it had always been, filled with mementos, old wedding photos, a porcelain vase, and a small picture of Ruth and Grace in nurses' uniforms. "I knew you would come back," Ruth said, setting her teacup down on the table. "Your mother used to say that one day the truth will find you before you can find it." Lena was silent. Ruth went to the cupboard and took out a small tin box, silver and scratched with age. "Grace left this for me. She told me to give it to you only when you were strong enough to hear the whole story." Lena opened the box with trembling hands. Inside were a few old photos, a tarnished silver chain, and a small leather notebook with the cover engraved with the words "Dreams of Maple Grove." She flipped through the pages. Inside were Grace's handwritten notes, plans for the free health center, a list of the neighborhood's residents, and a rough sketch she'd drawn herself. On the last page, there was a line that made her heart clench. "If anyone finds this book, please tell Michael that I never held a grudge. It's just that we let fear get the better of our love." Lena closed the book, tears streaming down her face. She understood. Her mother never wanted her to grow up filled with hatred. She wanted her to understand the value of kindness, even in the face of betrayal. "She always believed in the good," Ruth said, looking at her tenderly. "Grace used to say that if there was anything that would save a person, it was forgiveness, but not forgiveness of others, but forgiveness of oneself to be free." Lena bowed her head, her voice as soft as the wind. "I think maybe I understand now, but I don't know if I have the strength to do it. You're stronger than you think." Ruth smiled, "Just like your mother." As night fell, Lena sat on the porch, watching the rain gradually stop, the wind carrying the smell of damp leaves. There was a strange silence in her heart, no longer boiling, no longer aching, just a gentle sadness, like the last low note of a zither. She took the necklace from the box, wiped off the dust of time, and put it around her neck. On the pendant were 3 faint words: "Forgive, love, begin." Those words reminded her of what her mother once said: when you can't change the past, start over from your own heart. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and let the wind caress her hair. A tear fell. But this time, it wasn't bitter. The next morning, Lena left Ruth's house. She stopped as she passed the old Maple Grove sign. The once deserted lot was now filled with new apartments. But the small corner where her house had been was still there, a grassy clearing. She knelt down and put her hands on the cold ground. "Mom," she whispered, "I won't let your dream die. I'll find a way to rebuild that medical center. I'll do what you can't." A light breeze blew by, rustling the leaves, a vague response. Lena smiled slightly. In the dim sunlight, her face looked more peaceful than ever. In the distance, Nashville was still bustling and bright, but in her heart, everything was quiet, and somewhere, perhaps, her mother was smiling. 3 days had passed since Lena found her mother's notebook. She had not returned to the Harrington building, but her mind was constantly thinking about what she had learned. Every night, she sat by the window of her small apartment, opened the book Dreams of Maple Grove, and read, page by page, stroke by stroke, as if listening to her mother's voice in her heart. In her notebook, Grace wrote about more than just her dream of building a free health center. She also recorded the stories of the people in Maple Grove, the old man who had worked as a carpenter, the teacher who taught orphans, and the children who called her Mama Grace. They were not just names, but the soul of a community to which Grace devoted her life. Every time she read a line, Lena felt her eyes water. Her mother never spoke of those days, but through the pages, Lena understood. Her mother did not regret falling in love, but only regretted the unfulfilled dream. She woke early that morning. Dawn light filtered through the window onto the desk where the notebook lay open. She placed her hand on her mother's writing and said softly, "I will continue. Mother, I promise." Then she mustered up her courage and picked up the phone. The screen displayed the name she had been hesitant to call for the past 3 days, Michael Harrington. Her heart pounded, her hands shaking as she dialed. After a few rings, his voice came back, hoarse and tired. "Lena, it's me," she replied. "I wanted to see you. Today." There was a short silence. Then Michael said softly, "Thank you for calling. I'll wait." This time, Lena did not go to Harrington Tower. She chose the Hollow Bean Cafe, where she had sat and thought about everything. When she arrived, Michael was there, sitting alone by the window, no longer in his elegant suit, just in a simple gray shirt. Looking at him, she suddenly felt a little lighter in her heart. "Thank you for coming," he said as she sat down. "I didn't think you'd want to see me again." "I don't think so either," Lena replied, her voice calm. "But I found my mother's notebook. She called it Dreams of Maple Grove." Michael paused for a moment. "I heard her mention that name. She wrote a lot, about the neighborhood, about the people she helped. But on the last page, she wrote, 'If anyone finds the notebook, tell him she never held a grudge.'" Michael looked down, his hand shaking slightly. "She was good to the end." "Yes." Lena nodded. "And that's why I couldn't let her dream die. I want to build that medical center. Michael, I want to do what my mother never got to do." Michael looked up, his eyes filled with surprise and emotion. "Lena, do you know that it wasn't easy? That project was canceled more than 20 years ago, and the land there now belongs to another corporation." "I know," she said firmly, "but I'm not going to give up. I work in a restaurant. I know how to lobby, how to talk to real people. I don't have money, but I have faith. I just need someone to help me open the first door." Michael was silent. He looked at Lena for a long time in her eyes. He saw the Grace he had known strong, sincere, and determined. "If your mother were alive," he said softly, "she would be proud of you. So will you help me?" Lena asked, her voice blunt. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he opened his briefcase and pulled out a thin file. "I've had this for years, the original Maple Grove plan that Grace and I worked on. It's never been made public. I always thought someone would take it up someday. Maybe today is the day." Lena took the file, her heart sinking. The yellowed pages were filled with notes and drawings, her mother's handwriting and Michael's. She looked up and asked softly, "Why do you keep it?" Michael smiled sadly, "Because it's the only thing that makes me feel human." The sentence made Lena silent. Between them, there was no longer a boundary of hatred or the past, but sympathy, of two people who had lost the same woman. After a while, Michael continued, "I will help you. I can use the company's charity fund to get back the development rights for the land. But I have one condition." "What is it?" Lena asked. "This project should be called Grace Center, and the person in charge, you, not me." Lena's eyes widened. "Why? Because this is no longer my story," he said, his eyes sincere. "This is your mother's legacy, and your future." She looked at him for a long time, then nodded slightly. "Okay, but if I do it, I will do it my mother's way. No pomp, no show, just to help real people. That's the right way, too." Michael smiled slightly. There was a warm silence. Lena felt lighter. Something had changed. In her, in him, and in the way they looked at the past. As they parted, Michael stood up and held out his hand. "Thank you, Lena, for giving me the chance to make things right." Lena took his hand. "Don't thank me. Thank my mother. She's the one who taught me to believe that anyone can start over." Michael nodded, his eyes tearing up. "I know, and I won't let her down again." In the afternoon, Lena returned to her old home in Maple Grove. She stood in the middle of the lawn, the wind blowing gently, holding the old blueprint in her hand. The sunset dyed everything golden. In that moment, she felt her mother very close, as if she was standing right behind her, putting her hand on her shoulder, softly saying, "You did well, Lena." She closed her eyes and smiled. In her heart, she knew she had just made a promise, not only to her mother, but also to herself. A promise that the past might be filled with tears, but the future would have hope. One October morning, the soft sunlight stretched across the old Maple Grove grounds. The weeds had been cleared, and a few signs had been erected around the area Grace Center project, Free Community Health Center, under the sign. Lena stood silently, her eyes brimming with tears. She never thought that one day her mother's dream would come true. Behind them, the car stopped. Michael got out, wearing a simple brown jacket, no longer as cold as before. He carried a file, some new drawings, and a small smile on his face. "I still can't believe you did this so quickly," he said, "and I still don't believe you'll keep your promise," Lena replied, her voice tinged with humor. Michael laughed, a rare, real laugh. "I try." Over the past few weeks, Lena has become the centerpiece of the project. She has no construction experience, but she has heart and conviction. She calls local health organizations, finds sponsors, and convinces former Maple Grove residents to return and join in. Michael, with his reputation and influence, quietly paves the way, securing permits, land deals, and financing from the corporation's foundation. However, not all was smooth sailing. Some newspapers began to ask, why is Michael Harrington, the real estate tycoon, funding a nonprofit project headed by an unknown waitress? Some shareholders even protested, saying that this affected the company's reputation. One afternoon, as Lena was reviewing the plans, Michael walked into the small temporary office set up at the construction site. He placed the newspaper on the table. The headline read, "Secrets Behind the Grace Center Project, a Hidden Relationship." Lena read, sighing, "I knew this would happen." "I'll handle the media," Michael said sternly. "You don't have to worry." "No, don't hide anything," she replied, looking straight at him. "If they ask, tell them the truth, that my mother is Grace Carter, the one who loved you, and that you're making it right by helping me fulfill her dream." Michael was silent, his eyes showing emotion. "Aren't you afraid of getting hurt? I was hurt," Lena said, her voice calm. "But if I had been afraid, this project would never have been completed. I want people to know that kindness is not something to hide." Michael was silent for a long moment. He nodded. "You are very much like your mother, stubborn, and believing in the good beyond reason." Lena smiled slightly. "That's probably the only thing I'm proud of." They both looked out at the land being leveled. The sounds of excavators and hammers mingled with the wind blowing through the trees. Through the noise, Lena thought she could hear her mother's voice, warm, encouraging, and peaceful. A week later, the groundbreaking ceremony took place. There was no extravagance, just a few wooden chairs, a white tarp, and the people of the area. Children held balloons, adults brought flowers. They came not only for the project, but also for the woman who had helped them, Grace Carter. As Lena stepped up to the podium, microphone in hand, the entire arena fell silent. She looked down and saw dozens of familiar faces, people who had lived in the old Maple Grove, people her mother had cared for when she was sick. "Thank you," she began, her voice breaking. "This was our home. Years ago, it was lost because of the decisions of those in power. But today, we will rebuild it not for revenge, but to heal." She paused, then continued. "My mother believed that everyone can make a difference, even if it is just a small act, and I believe that, if she were alive, she would want us to continue spreading that belief. Below." Michael sat silently. The sunlight shone on his face, making the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes more visible. In that moment, he seemed to see Grace standing beside Lena, smiling gently as before. When Lena finished her speech, the whole lot erupted in applause. As she stepped down, Michael approached and handed her the first shovel. "You should be the one laying the foundation," he said. Lena looked at him, then stuck the shovel into the ground. A gentle push, and the dirt rose, the beginning of something new. "For my mother," she whispered. "And for my daughter," Michael replied, his voice choking. Both of them bowed their heads. The wind blew, carrying the smell of earth, the smell of hope, the smell of new beginnings. That evening, after everyone had left, Lena remained in the empty lot. The yellow light cast a long shadow on the grass. Michael walked over, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. "One for you, one for me. No sugar, if you like." She took the cup, smiling slightly. "You have a good memory. I'm trying to be an observant father." The words stunned Lena. She didn't reply, just looked off into the distance at the land. After a moment, she said softly, "I don't know if I'm ready to call you father, but today, for the first time, I don't feel lost." Michael smiled, his eyes warm. "That's enough. Lena. Sometimes, just being there is a way to love." She nodded slightly, tears rolling down her cheeks, mingling with the bitter taste of the coffee. She knew some wounds would never heal, but today they had stopped bleeding. Behind them, a small, makeshift sign was erected, engraved in white paint, Grace Center, because every soul deserves care. Lena read, then whispered, "Mom, I think we're really starting over." Winter came later than usual. Nashville was covered in a thin layer of frost, and the chill crept into every corner. On the old Maple Grove site, the Grace Center was taking shape. The two-story building with its dark red tiled roof had been completed, its glass windows reflecting the soft morning light. Lena stood in the middle of the construction site, her hands in her coat pockets, her face dusty but her eyes bright. She had never felt more at home than at that moment. The sound of hammers, saws, and people talking loudly, all of it harmonized into a song of life. Each brick, each piece of wood seemed to contain her mother's memories, the dreams of a community that had been forgotten. Michael arrived, carrying 2 cups of hot coffee. "I thought you might need this," he said, handing her one. "Thanks," Lena replied, taking it. "You're earlier than I expected." Michael smiled. "I didn't want to miss this moment." They were about to lay the last brick of the first floor. The two stood side by side, watching the group of workers at work. No one said anything, just silently observing. In that silence, there was no longer the distance of years, no longer the invisible walls. There were only 2 people, working together to rebuild what had been lost. "You know," Lena said softly, "I used to think happiness was having the answer to everything, but it turns out, sometimes happiness is just seeing someone change, honestly." Michael turned, his eyes deep and warm. "I also used to think that atonement meant doing something big, but now I know atonement means daring to stay, daring to face it, and I'm grateful that you gave me that chance." A cold wind blew, swirling fine dust in the light. Lena smiled slightly, turning back to look at the building. "I think my mother would like this place." "I believe so," Michael said, his voice low. "She once told me, if one day we are no longer together, let the good things between us be useful to others." Lena paused. "Did my mother really say that?" "Yes." He nodded. "That was the last thing she said to me, before I left." She was silent for a moment. Her eyes glittered with tears, reflecting the fading sunlight. "So you still believed in him, even when he hurt you?" "She always believed in the good in people," Michael replied. "And now, she makes me believe it's true." That afternoon, they went to the small cemetery where Grace was buried. Lena carried a bouquet of white daisies. Michael held a candle. The air was still, except for the smell of damp earth and incense. They stood together in front of a simple headstone that read Grace Carter, a healer of hearts. Lena knelt down and placed the flowers. "Mother," she said softly, "I did as you wished. Grace Center is almost complete." Michael also bowed his head. "Grace, if you can hear me, I just want to say sorry, and thank you." They were both silent. A light breeze blew by, causing the candle in Michael's hand to sway, but it did not go out. Lena looked at the flame, her heart filled with emotion. It was as if her mother was still there, witnessing them. After that day, they returned to work. The project began to receive media attention, but this time, no negative gossip. The story of a waitress and a billionaire joining forces to build a free medical center spread rapidly. Charitable organizations began to contact them, and volunteers signed up. A small press conference was held as the project entered its final stages. Lena stood in front of dozens of cameras, her face calm. When asked, "Can you share the reason why you chose the name Grace Center?" She smiled, her voice gentle yet resolute. "Because Grace is not just my mother's name, it also means kindness. And I believe kindness is what can heal this world." Backstage, Michael stood silently watching her, his heart filled with pride. He never thought that someone who once carried hatred could stand before the public with such a peaceful look. She had done what he could not do in his entire life, turn pain into hope. A month later, Grace Center officially opened. No red ribbons, no fireworks, just the laughter of children and the applause of the people. The small clinic opened its doors first, welcoming poor patients from all over the area. Lena walked down the hallway, her hands lightly touching the walls. The smell of fresh paint mixed with the scent of pine, and light flooded through the glass doors. She stopped at the main wall, where a large photograph of Grace Carter hung, with the words written below. She taught us that healing begins with kindness. Michael stepped forward and placed his hand on her shoulder. "You did it, Lena." She looked at the photo and softly replied, "It's not me, it's Mom, it's Grandpa, it's everyone here." He smiled. "And you, who dared to believe that the past could be changed." Outside, the sun had cleared after a light rain. People gathered in the yard, taking souvenir photos. Lena looked around, saw bright faces, hands clasped together. All of it was proof that pain, when turned into action, can create something good. She turned to Michael and whispered, "I think my mother has forgiven you." Michael chuckled, his eyes glistening, "And I think you do too." Lena was silent, then nodded. "Maybe, finally, I learned to forgive, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace." He looked at her, speechless. "Thank you, Lena," she replied with a gentle smile. Grace's smile. "Thank my mother. She taught us the two most important things in life, love and forgiveness." As the afternoon fell, Lena sat on the steps of Grace Center, watching the last rays of sunlight dye the ground golden. Michael sat next to her, the two of them silent, only listening to the wind blowing through the maple trees. Somewhere, in their hearts, a new season has begun. The following spring, Grace Center was radiant in the early morning sunlight. The cherry blossoms in the front yard were in full bloom, their petals fluttering in the wind like light memories. Lena stood on the steps, wearing a white blouse, with a name tag on her chest reading Lena Carter, Executive Director. Almost a year had passed since she laid the first brick, and now the center had become a refuge for hundreds of people. From the window, she looked out at the campus. Children played among the trees. Adults sat waiting to be seen. A few nurses guided patients through filling out information forms. Everything was full of life, something the place had once lost. She stepped out into the hallway, breathing in the sweet scent of pine trees and the spring breeze. Her heart no longer felt empty, but full of pride, of gratitude, of love healed. Michael came over, holding a bouquet of white tulips. He came every Monday morning, unannounced, just to stroll around the center. "These are from my little garden behind my house," he said hoarsely. "Would you like them in the lobby?" Lana took the bouquet, smiling slightly. White tulips, the flower of forgiveness. "Do you still remember?" "How could I forget?" he replied. "Grace once said, if one day she were no longer around, plant lots of tulips, so that whoever walks by will feel their heart soften." They walked into the main hall. A large wall was covered with photos of the first patients, of volunteers, and an old photo of Grace Carter, her face kind, her eyes bright as the morning sun. Beneath the photo were words engraved in bronze. "Healing begins with compassion." Lena put the flowers in the vase, then turned to Michael. "You know, sometimes I think, if my mother were still alive, she would find everything so complete." Michael nodded, his eyes shining with a soft sadness. "I still feel her here. Lena, in every room, in every breath of this place. Grace never really left." The words made Lena bow her head slightly. She said nothing, just silently looked towards the hallway, where an old woman was holding hands with a young nurse. They were laughing and chatting together, a simple yet warm image. That afternoon, Lena gave a small talk to a group of student volunteers from the University of Nashville Medical School. She told them about the center's journey, about her mother's faith, and about the transformation of a person who once confused money with real value. "You might think I'm just a lucky waitress," she said, her voice even and filled with emotion. "But the truth is, I believe one thing, that whoever you are, if your heart is in the right place, the world will listen." The whole hall applauded. Lena saw in their eyes what she once carried, a small spark of a desire to live a decent life. In the evening, when the center was empty, Lena sat in her office. On the table was a cup of hot tea and her mother's old notebook, Dreams of Maple Grove. She opened it, looked at the blurred lines. On the last page, she wrote a new line, "Mom. Your dream has come true. But I think this road is still long. I will continue. For you, for those who still believe that kindness is never out of fashion." She closed the book and smiled. Outside the window, the moon was shining brightly like a mirror, shining down on the newly planted white tulip garden. The wind gently shook the petals, as if someone was caressing them tenderly. There was a soft knock on the door. Michael entered, holding a small wooden box. "I have something to give you." Lena opened the box. Inside was an old necklace, a silver pendant with the letter G engraved on it. "It was your mother's," Michael said softly. "She left it to me. I think it's time it went back to the rightful owner." Lena held the bracelet, her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. Not just for the bracelet." Michael smiled gently. "Thank you, Lena. Thank you for giving me the chance to be a father, even if it was late." They looked at each other in the warm, golden light. No words were needed, just the silence of two souls finally at peace. The next day, Lena visited her mother's cemetery. She placed the bouquet of white tulips beside the headstone, then put on the necklace. "Mother," she whispered, "spring has returned, and I think, at last, we are all forgiven." A gentle breeze blew, sending flower petals fluttering around her. Lena closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of the sun on her cheeks, and in that moment she knew her mother's love was still guiding her, just as it always had been. In the afternoon, Michael came after her. He didn't say anything, just stood beside her, looking at the horizon together. They were both silent for a long time, until Lena whispered, "Do you think, one day, this place will be bigger?" "I believe so," Michael replied, "because kindness, when given, always has a way of growing." She smiled, her eyes sparkling, then let it grow just like Mother believed. The afternoon gradually faded, the sunset dyeing the cemetery golden. They left together, their shadows long on the small path lined with cherry blossoms. In the distance, the gray center was still lit up, a symbol of faith, love, and healing. And as the petals fell gently on her shoulders, Lena felt something indescribable, a completeness, a peace that she had been searching for all her life. 5 years later, it's a bright June morning in Nashville. On Main Avenue, a new Grace Center sign gleams among the trees. Beneath the words is a glowing white tulip symbol, a symbol of kindness, forgiveness, and new beginnings. Lena emerged from the main building. She was no longer the waitress she had once been, but a confident, composed woman. Her brown hair was tied back, her eyes were firm but gentle. Today, she was to speak to representatives of organizations from across the state who had come to learn about the Grace Center model. The center was now more than just a clinic. It had become a network of nonprofit community care that spanned the southern United States. Across the courtyard, Michael sat on a bench, a thin book in his hand. He was much older. His hair was white, but his face was still kind and his eyes were still bright. Every morning, he came here, bringing Lena a cup of coffee, the same unsweetened one. Seeing her coming, he smiled. "Are you preparing for a big speech today?" "Yes," Lena replied, sitting down next to him, a little nervous. They said there would be a national reporter covering it live. She has faced hundreds of patients, seen them in pain, despair, and then smiled. Compared to that, a few cameras are nothing. Michael chuckled. Lena looked at him with affection. "You always say the right thing at the right time. I've had a few years to learn how to be a father," he replied, his voice laced with humor. They both laughed, a soft, sympathetic laugh. Then they were silent for a moment, watching the row of white tulips sway in the wind in the front yard. Lena said softly, "Mother would be proud if she saw this." Michael nodded, his eyes distant. "I think she still sees everywhere." A gentle breeze blew by, sending flower petals fluttering around them. Lena took a deep breath, then stood up. "I have to go. They're waiting, before leaving." She turned back and took his hand. "Thank you, Michael, not only for what you did for Grace Center, but for staying." He took her hand, his voice low and warm. "I stayed for you, Lena, because you reminded me that I can still be good, even though I've been wrong all my life." She nodded slightly, her eyes filled with tears. Then she walked away, her figure small but steady in the sunlight. The conference began in the Grace Center's large auditorium. Hundreds of people were there, doctors, journalists, activists. A large screen projected images of Grace Center locations across the state smiles, brightly lit homes, nurses holding patients' hands. Lena stepped onto the stage. There was applause, but she only bowed her head slightly, smiling modestly. 5 years ago, she began. "I was just a waitress. I had no money, no fame, just an old notebook from my mother, a woman who believed that kindness could change the world." She stopped, looking around the silent room. "And now, I know she's right, because I've seen it in people nurses who volunteered without pay, people who donated every penny to save a stranger, and people like Michael Harrington who made mistakes, but dared to start again. A flash of emotion swept through the auditorium. Michael sat in the front row, tears streaming down his face. He made no attempt to hide them, just silently wiped them away with an old handkerchief, the one Grace had once embroidered a G on the corner of. Lena continued, her voice warm and calm. Grace Center is not mine. It is for all those who believe that kindness never goes out of style. It is a place where we remember that sometimes just a small act, an apology, a handshake, is enough to heal a heart. The whole hall stood up and applauded. Lena bowed her head, then smiled deeply, a smile that represented both Grace and Michael. That evening, after the ceremony, Lena returned to the tulip field. The sun had set, the trees were dyed orange by the setting sun. Michael sat there, but he had already fallen asleep, his face peaceful as if in a dream. She walked over to him, intending to wake him, but then stopped. He still held the small book Dreams of Maple Grove in his hand. She sat down beside him and said softly, "Go to sleep. Michael, my mother must be waiting for you." A tear rolled down, but it was a tear of gratitude. A year later, in the small garden behind Grace Center, Lena planted another row of white tulips. In the middle of the garden was a small plaque with the following inscription: "In memory of Grace and Michael Harrington, for teaching us that forgiveness is the purest form of love." Beside her, a little girl ran up and pulled her hand. "Miss Lena, did my mom really say you were the one who built this center?" Lena looked down, smiling. "No, I'm just continuing my mother's dream. The people who actually built this place are people who believe in goodness, just like you." The little girl smiled brightly and ran through the flower garden. Lena stood up and looked after her, the spring sunlight shining on her golden hair. A gentle breeze blew by, carrying the scent of tulips, the scent of memories, of love, of healing. Lena closed her eyes and felt two hands on her shoulders, one of her mother, one of her father. They were no longer there, but their love remained, mingled with the afternoon light, and in the middle of that garden, the dream called Grace continues to live, continues to spread. As Mother once wrote, when you give kindness, you leave a legacy that time cannot take away. Lena smiled, her eyes glowing in the sunset. She knew her journey was not over. For true love, like light, will always find its way. No matter how long the night, life has a strange way of teaching us not through comfort, but through pain, forgiveness, and rediscovery. Waitress finds her mother's photo in a billionaire's wallet is more than just a story about family secrets. It's about the invisible thread that connects us through love, regret, and the courage to begin again. Lena's journey reminds us that forgiveness isn't weakness, it's strength in its purest form. When she chose to understand rather than condemn, she didn't erase her pain, she transformed it, just like her. We all have a choice to be prisoners of our past or architects of our future. Michael's redemption teaches us that it's never too late to make things right. Even when we can't change what happened, we can choose what happens next. Grace, though gone, lives on, proving that love leaves a mark no time can erase. So when life feels heavy, remember this: every scar tells a story, and every act of kindness plants a seed that outlives us. The light you give to others will one day find its way back to you. Thank you for watching, for feeling, and for believing that stories like this still matter. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe, because every share is a small act of kindness that keeps hope alive. Forgive, love, begin again,